I was on mute. I'm doing well, really, really well. I'm excited for the holidays. It's my
Yeah,
favorite time, like
yeah,
many
me
people.
too.
So,
Me too.
so I'm very excited about just seeing some positivity come out of it.
I know
Um,
we all need that. Do you have little
mhm.
ones?
Yeah, I have
Good.
one
Do you
little guy.
watch all the holiday cartoons and movies and
Yeah, all of that. We started a while ago. We started after Halloween. We moved already to holiday movies. We've
yeah,
watched every single one.
yeah.
So,
My kids and I we'd always make hot cocoa and maybe chocolate chip cookies, or we'd cook together, and then I'd sit and show them all the holiday cartoons and shows. It's very
yeah.
festive.
Yeah, it's fun. You can hear my little one crying right now. Sorry.
That's what they're
Sorry.
supposed to do. In the
Yeah.
job description. It's when Neil starts doing that we have to worry.
You'd be surprised the sounds that come out of me. Um, no, actually, we're trying to expand Louisana's horizons. So we had a lecturer come in and talk about Billy Crystal.
Oh, I love Billy Crystal.
Well, the problem was Louisana never heard of him.
Oh my. Oh no.
I
Well, he's
know.
really, really funny.
It's very funny.
His book that came out about 3 or 4 years ago about aging, I got it and I was reading it on an airplane. And I had probably four of those moments where you just burst out loud, you can't contain it. And everybody was looking at me like, what is this guy reading and what is wrong with him? His book is really, really funny.
It, also, the one that he did the show on, I think it was called 700 Sundays, which was about his growing up. It was
Yeah.
very poignant.
I heard about it. I heard him talk about it and heard about the book, but didn't read that one. He's
Really
good.
well.
Billy Crystal's funny and smart and he's talented. Louisana, he had hosted the Academy Awards a couple times.
Yeah, I learned that on the talk we had. I learned it quite a bit, and I still have to watch a whole bunch of movies that I was scheduled to watch now.
And there's a really funny movie called City Slickers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, about him going out west and as a cowboy. It's funny.
And that's with Jack Palance
Yes, Jack Palance, who would do his one-arm push-ups.
doing the one-arm
And there's
push-ups.
another movie, The Princess Bride.
Yes.
It's a great
That was-
movie. It was one of my kids' favorite movies. Louisana would be appropriate for the kids when they're little. It is an adventure, romance. It's a really, really clever, good message, funny, G-rated movie. And Billy Crystal does a cameo in it, and he's a riot.
But the
I'm
movie
gonna
to
have
watch,
to check it out. Thank you.
and also Louisana, When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah,
Of course.
yeah.
Harry Met Sally. Okay. Is that one
Okay.
G rated? No?
You'll understand
No,
it.
your kids would like The Princess Bride.
Got it.
My kids, when they were little, loved it. And you know how all kids have a movie they watch over and over? That was their movie. And I watched it, 10 times with them and never tired of it. Mindy, you remember all those movies, right?
I do. Yes, I'm old enough to remember all of them.
Did you like any of those?
I did, all of them.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so it's now 7 o'clock and we have lots to cover. Two quick things before we turn to Dr. Watson. First, on behalf of all of the Heron Bay family, a healthy, happy Thanksgiving to each and every one of us and your families, extended families. It'll be different, but that doesn't mean it can't be something that we're thankful about. Secondly, for those of you here in Heron Bay, go outside. The holiday lights are on at all the entrances and the clubhouses. If you want to feel good, go see it because it's absolutely spectacular. So now Louisana has a couple of public service announcements, and then we'll turn to Dr. Watson to tell us actually what did happen.
Awesome. So we have upcoming December 2nd, we have our comedy show. If you haven't signed up so yet, go ahead and do so. We have 3 great comedians. They're going to do about 20 to 25-minute comedy shows each. One of them was actually in the Comedy Central. She is hilarious. It's going to be PG-13. It's going to be a lot of fun. So sign up for that Zoom. I'll send out a reminder tomorrow if you haven't signed up yet. Then after that, on December 5th, that's Saturday, it's one of our biggest, most exciting events so far. It's our holiday parade. It's our first one. We're going to have Parkland has given us 1 fire engine, a SWAT vehicle, a fleet of cops, cars and motorcycles. Coral Springs has also chimed in and given us a fire engine, some motorcycle cops, as well as some vehicles. We're gonna have 6 Marines dressed in blues, which are gonna ride on one float, and characters and all kinds of fun things for you guys to watch. You can also participate. We're only taking 10 vehicles. That's also going to open up soon. You will see that come in through your email, so you can sign up to be one of the 10 vehicles that can participate on the parade. The parade is going to start at the PDL, and it's going to make their way around the neighborhood. You will see the map of the neighborhood on Monday, where you can figure out what's your best spot to choose to watch the whole fleet come through. The parade's going to start at 6 p.m. and we hope to be by the South Gate at 7:45, 8.
Okay, thank you. So now we are going to have Dr. Robert Watson present to us for the 3rd time. I know the day after the election, one of the first calls I made was Louis Honor and said to her, please call Dr. Watson and ask him to explain what happened. Now, when you gave your nonpartisan talk about the election, I left you with the thought that you left me horribly depressed. With that, undepress us all. What happened, Dr. Watson?
Well, Neil, get the drinks ready because I think you're going to need them. Well, you got the holiday parade and all these comedians coming. I'll tell you, all those programs you have put together sure beat a depressing lecture from an historian. Okay, so let me try to share my screen here and we'll jump into this. There we go. Okay, so hello, everybody. I hope you're all well. I wish, this COVID was behind us so I could come out in person. And I'd like to congratulate Neil and Minda and Luisana for organizing these events, because while we're all stuck inside, we need social distancing, but we also need socially to be supporting one another. So here we go. All right, so I put together a whole list of, takeaways from the election, where we're headed for 2021, explanations, predictions. So I'll run through several of them, see how many I get through. And you all know me, I'm happy to do Q&A. So have at me anything you want to talk about, and I'll be happy to do it. So I guess the first place to start is there's an upside to the election, no matter what your party affiliation is, and that is record turnout. So more Americans voted in November than have ever voted before. And for the first time since 1900, voting turnout was up. So it's the highest percentage voting turnout since 1900, although it's an apples and oranges comparison, quite frankly. It's not a fair one, because in 1900, that's 20 years before women got the right to vote. And for all intents and purposes, African-American men, Native Americans, and others really weren't voting. So turnout, you can see on my table there, 66.5% is where they came in at. I was hoping we get to 67 or 68, but that's still pretty darn good. Of all 50 states, Florida came in 14th place in terms of high turnout. We were over 70%, as you can see there, so that's good. The other good news is I think we all need to congratulate our election officials around the country, despite the pandemic, which means they didn't have the full staff of volunteers and others to help them count, despite a record number of people that turned out, despite a record number of early votes and vote by mail, which adds new wrinkles to the whole challenge of counting, despite the president repeatedly saying it's a hoax, it's a fraud, they're corrupt, they're stealing it, and criticizing election officials, despite over 40 lawsuits from the Republican Party leading up to the election, and then countless after, about 30 afterward. These election officials managed to produce a result in 4 days, which is remarkable. Remember, we do not need to know the results of the presidential election on the night of the election. That is, it's always the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Historically, elections were never called the night of the election. They took days or weeks. We've had elections that have dragged out for 4 months, actually, in 1800. So I think our election officials did a remarkable job, despite the overwhelming turnout, the obstacles, the lawsuits, and limited staff. So I think that's an upside to this whole thing, and that we should all celebrate that. Where are we right now? So you see, I put the numbers up there. The Electoral College ended up 306, 232. Of course, the magic number you need to be president is 270, 270, which I mentioned before. The Constitution in Article 2 specifies, and there's statutory discussions of it subsequently, that we have a total today of 538 electors. That's 435 members of the House, plus 100 members of the Senate, plus 3 for the District of Columbia equals 538. You need a majority to be president. That's 270. So first person passed 270. So Biden got 36 votes past it. So it was a close race, but that's where we are now. The other number I put there, which is exciting, it's the total vote count thus far, and it's 155 million people. 2016, for comparative purposes, only 128 million people showed up. So that's remarkable. Joe Biden appears to have not only beaten Trump in the Electoral College, but in the popular vote, Biden beat Trump by about 6 million votes, which is the largest margin of victory in American political history. The previous largest margin was Hillary beating Trump by 3 million votes in 2016. So Biden doubled that margin, and it is therefore record largest victory. So now we have the Senate and House. So there was a lot of talk that we'd have a blue wave. All the polling was once again off, predicting that there would be a massive blue wave that would drown the Republicans all around the country. It was not the case. There really wasn't a red wave either, but we could say there was a red high tide. So the Democrats won the White House. The other thing the Democrats won was in several states, there were, I guess you could say, progressive amendments and referenda on marijuana and rights and decriminalization and a number of things all around the country, including even the South. Left-leaning amendments and referenda items passed on the ballots around the country. Other than that, though, it was a Republican victory. Republicans picked up seats in the House. Republicans picked up state seats all across this country. So it was a better election generally for the Republicans than the Democrats. And the Senate right now is a dead heat. It will depend on the special runoff election in Georgia, which will be happening pretty soon. So Georgia is one of those southern states that still has this Jim Crow era system. And what that was a lot of the southern states is yet another way, along with poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, white-only primaries. They added another wrinkle to assure that blacks would never gain power, and that was they had a runoff between the top 2 candidates, figuring those would always be 2 white candidates or white sanctioned or white approved. So Georgia still has that old system, hasn't reformed it yet. So depending on the outcome of those seats in Georgia, those 2 Senate races in Georgia, that will decide the control of the Senate. Now, this is important for both parties. One reason being is Donald Trump has pretty much withdrawn from just about every major treaty, every major agreement, and every major international alliance that we've had around the world. We've never seen anything quite like it, and I'll talk about that later. So if the current president-elect, Joe Biden, if he wants to renew America's standing around the world and rekindle our alliances and agreements with all over the world, he's going to need the Senate, because the Senate will need to weigh in and ratify those treaties. Now, he can sign international agreements, which is an international version of an executive order, which you don't need the Senate. That's largely what Trump did. He just withdrew unilaterally through international agreements. So Biden could put us back in a lot of those through that. The Senate will also be important for the courts. As you're aware, Barack Obama was not able to make his final appointment on the Supreme Court of Merrick Garland, who had 10 months remaining Mitch McConnell and every single, and I'm not picking on the Republicans and I'm not being partisan, I'm being factual. You know, one of the great threats to this country is alternative facts. And whether it ruffles our egos or upsets us, we do still need to talk factually. So I will do that. There were 10 months left for Garland. Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, and every single Republican in the Senate, every single one, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, they all said it's utterly unprecedented for a president to get an appointment in his last year. That's not true. There have been over 30 judges and justices appointed in a president's last year. Ronald Reagan had a few dozen, not judicial, but overall appointments in his last year. And then after saying that, 10 months was unprecedented, the Republicans forced Barrett through as people were voting, as millions of votes were cast. So they were fibbing on all those cases. So, but that wasn't the only one. There were a few dozen seats to the district courts. You know, at the federal level, we have the Supreme Court, appellate courts, the appeals courts, and district courts. Roughly 90 of the latter, 13 of the middle, and one of the Supreme Court. Obama had a couple dozen district court and a couple dozen appeals courts or appellate court appointments that Mitch McConnell held up for over a year. The media did a rotten job reporting on it because they can't seem to walk and chew gum at the same time. They were just focused on Merrick Garland and everything else. So I'm upset at the media. I'm also upset at McConnell and the Republicans for grotesquely and blatantly, repeatedly violating the U.S. Constitution. But I'm also just as upset at the Democrats for not growing a spine and bringing charges against McConnell or trying to have him impeached for dozens of times violating the Constitution. So Trump was able to make a lot of judicial appointments. He has made, I think, more judicial appointments and has had a larger imprint on our federal courts than any president except George Washington, who made all the appointments, when the country was founded. Trump in the last debate said he's made over 200 appointments to the courts. It's something like 125 or so, but still, that's remarkable. That's absolutely remarkable. So it'll be important to control the Senate as any other appointments become available. If the Republicans control it, the Democrats won't be able to seek just a little bit of balance. It's going to take several years for the Democrats to even get a smidge of balance. Now, the next thing I put on the screen there for you was the red mirage. You suffered through me lecturing about the election. And if anybody listened to me for the months and months leading up to this, I didn't talk about the red mirage. That was the analyst and national news networks. Because I didn't like the term. I think it's confusing. What they said is red being Republican, blue being Democratic, that Trump would go up early, but it would be a red mirage because Biden would then catch up. Why? Most states have measures whereby they count the votes that were cast on election day first. Then they count the votes by mail later. Republicans were more likely to vote in person. Democrats were way more likely to vote by mail. So if you count the votes in person first, that would give Trump an artificial lead. But then as you count the votes by mail, which overwhelmingly came in Democratic, then Biden would catch up. I was saying for months, as you remember, I was saying my way of making it an easier explanation. I said Trump would have a really good first quarter, but Biden would have an even better fourth quarter. I think that's easier to understand. So that's what I used. Indeed, that the votes by mail came in at record levels for Democrats. Trump even complained for a few days why more Republicans didn't get out and vote by mail. The answer is because he spent 1 year telling them not to vote by mail, alleging that mail-in votes are fraudulent, a hoax, and so on, which they are not. We also have some other issues here. Trump becomes the first president in history, and really quite damaging and alarming, it must be said, irrespective of your party, if we love our Constitution and our democracy, really damning and damaging for our democracy and our standing in the eyes of the world and faith in our electoral system. He was alleging massive voter fraud without any evidence. He was also calling for states to stop counting votes, alleging that that was a fraud. In fact, counting votes is an election. And he had Rudy Giuliani and others out alleging all this without a shred of evidence, or without even making a firm allegation. And I think it further undermined Trump that he was calling for them to stop counting votes in states he was ahead, but to count votes in states that he was behind. So which way is it? So anyways, that was damning. So again, the Republicans had put lawsuits, over 40 lawsuits in 15 states leading up to the elections, and around 30 lawsuits over the past couple of days since the election. Most all the lawsuits were designed to suppress the vote, and that's not being partisan, it's not being biased. There's no other way to explain it. For example, Republican efforts were to close voting precincts in Black neighborhoods. There's only one explanation for that. To disallow or close precincts on college campuses, to make it harder to vote by mail, to not count votes by mail. By law, each county which runs its elections, you remember I said we don't have a national election. We have 51 individual elections, the states and DC, but then each county, so Florida has 67 counties, every county runs its own election and then reports it to the state, who then reports it. So each county by law around the country is required to have drop boxes, a place where you can go and drop off your ballot. It's just that the laws typically don't say how many. So what Republicans were doing is they were trying to close all of them down, but they were losing those lawsuits because the law says you have to have it. So then they said, let's close them all down but one. So in places like Texas with Governor Abbott and other places that the Republicans controlled, they closed every drop box location but one. So you had Harris County, Texas, which is Houston, which Houston's what, about the fourth largest city in the country, and the county's bigger than some countries, and they had only one drop box. So the Republican lawsuits were designed to suppress the vote. Now, here's 2 dates to remember, although it looks now like this thing is finally over. By law, the states have 35 days to count their votes. That would take us to December 7th. Also, the other date is when do the electors meet and cast their vote. And that's the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, which this year, by Constitution, by law, that's when it is. This year is December 14th. So once the electors gather and cast their vote, then this thing should finally be put to bed. I think what Trump was hoping for, because he and our governor in Florida and other Republicans were asking Republican legislatures around the country to ignore the vote and certify a slate of electors for Trump. Is that constitutional? Yes, that's disturbing. Is it legal? Yes. Is it ethical or moral? God, no. But has it happened before? Yes. So this is how crazy our election system is. The problem with Trump's arguments is in claiming that the elections official in Georgia, the legislature in Arizona and elsewhere were hijacked by the Democrats and it was fraud. What people need to remember is those states have a Republican governor, a Republican legislature, Republican election officials, and in most of the counties, they're Republican. So how could they certify for the Democrats? Moreover, in those same states where Trump was complaining it was rigged, Republicans picked up seats. So if the Democrats rigged it, why wouldn't they have the Republicans lose around the state or in congressional races? So, of course, it doesn't make any sense, and it's a national disgrace any way you look at it. Concession, Trump still hasn't conceded as of a couple hours ago. So who knows where that's going to go. So it was a close race, but not the closest race in history. We've had a number of nail biters, everybody. In 1796, as you can see on the screen here, John Adams against Thomas Jefferson. Adams beat Jefferson in the Electoral College by, get this, 3 votes, 71 to 68. Talk about a nail biter. And Adams was furious, by the way, because he and Jefferson were good friends and Jefferson challenged him. This feud would end up helping to form 2 political parties, Adams and the Federalists, Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists. Then in 1800, Jefferson challenged him again. Up until the year 1804, the person who got the most votes was president. The person who got the second most votes was vice president. Screwy. They changed it in 1804 after the sitting vice president, Aaron Burr, got mad at Hamilton and shot and killed him in a duel. which means that Dick Cheney wasn't the first vice president to shoot someone, just a second. At any rate, so in 1800, it was a tie. Adams, Jefferson, and Burr, a three-way race. Jefferson and Burr tied 73-73 in 1800, and it took 4 months, November, December, January, and February, and 36 revotes to break the tie. That's just crazy. And it was Hamilton that broke the tie, which is one of the many reasons why Burr shot him, because Hamilton then broke the tie by giving it to Jefferson over Burr. And Hamilton could not stand Jefferson, so that really hurt Burr. In 1824, and you can see I have the Electoral College map there on the top of your screen in the blue, yellow, green, and orange. It's a four-way race between Jackson, Adams, Crawford, and Clay. That would be Henry Clay. And Andrew Jackson was in first place in the popular vote and in first place in the Electoral College, but he did not have a majority. So they had to go to that tiebreaker. The House of Representatives runs the tiebreaker. And in the tiebreaker, Henry Clay put together a deal called the corrupt bargain and flipped it and gave it to John Quincy Adams, even though he was in second place. Was that legal? Yes. Was it constitutional? Yes. Shows you how screwy our system is. The closest election in history other than that 1800 tie was in 1876. That was Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican from Ohio, and Samuel Tilden, the Democrat from New York. So Tilden was ahead in the popular vote and the Electoral College, but he was a state shy of having a majority. And there were 3 southern states that had yet to cast their votes. South Carolina, Louisiana, and of course, us, Florida, right? So what the House did when they had to get together and certify this rather than a tiebreaker mechanism, because no one had still hit a majority, the House appointed a 15-member committee to decide how to cast those 3 southern states' electors. The committee was 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. And on a straight party line, 8-7, so by one vote, they certified all 3 states for the Republican Hayes, who won by 1 vote in the Electoral College. Of course, in 2000, 2016, and 2020, they were all close votes as well. I'm going to skip the lawsuits and go to this. One thing we're awaiting and we're all worried about is a peaceful transfer of power. America has been blessed in that we have always had peaceful transfers of power. This is a hallmark of our democracy and Western democracies. It's something that the world looks at, that we have bragged at with the world. However, this is ending now. Donald Trump will be the first president in history to violate the sacred aspect of our democracy. Now, there's a difference between a peaceful transfer of power and a civil transfer of power. A peaceful transfer of power is when the president doesn't call out the tanks or the police, when he doesn't refuse to leave, when he refuses to recognize the results of the election. A civil transfer of power is when the outgoing administration works with the transition team of the incoming administration to prepare those. It looks like with Trump, we won't have either, and that'll mark a first. We've had some less than peaceful and less than civil. We've never had a one that wasn't peaceful. We've had a few that were not real civil and helpful. The first one was in 1800. You can see the picture at the bottom left. That's John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Adams was so upset at his friend Jefferson for challenging him again and beating him that the night before the inaugural, and back then the inaugural was March 4th, so this would have been the night of March 3rd. Today it's January 20th, and it's been there, that date, ever since 1937 because of the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. So Adams was so mad at Jefferson that under cover of darkness the night before the inauguration, he loaded up his carriage and snuck out of the capital city. So there was no civil transition team because they couldn't find the president. Now, it wasn't a big deal in 1801 because Jefferson had been the vice president, so he was prepped. Secondly, we didn't have a global pandemic, the threat of nuclear war, the threat of global climate change, or international terrorism, so it wasn't such a big deal. The other picture, you see Truman, my buddy, and Ike in 1953, Harry would become the first president in history to prepare a transition. He wanted to brief intelligence, national security, espionage. He wanted to brief and work with the incoming Eisenhower administration because Truman, who had dropped the bomb, who had been vice president for only 80 some days when FDR died on April 12, 1945 in Warm Springs, Georgia, of a cerebral hemorrhage, Truman wanted to make sure he knew what it was like to hit the ground running and not be prepped. So he wanted to make sure that happened. Although Ike, shame on Ike, Ike stiffed him and wouldn't agree to it. Then Eisenhower wasn't real cooperative with Kennedy. Kennedy didn't have a chance to because he was killed. LBJ helps Nixon. But then what we see in modern times, really every president in modern times has been gracious and helpful. Bush 1 to Bill Clinton to Bush 2, Bush 2 to Obama, Obama to Trump. They've all been remarkably gracious in helping the transition by prepping, briefing everybody. Sadly, that all ends now in this national disgrace. Why is it important for the transfer of power and transition? I wrote on the board on your PowerPoint, logistics, operational concerns, even IT. Imagine the passwords for all the computers. The military has thousands and thousands of computers, hundreds of thousands. State Department, embassies all over the world, special envoys, every government agency, just the password code, just the systems to make sure everything's an agreement. The command and control capabilities and communication with our embassies and military bases around the world. This is huge. Plus the incoming president is going to appoint 4,000 to 5,000 people. They all need to be briefed. They need to be screened. They need to be prepped. There has to be national security clearances awarded. And about 1,000 of those appointments are going to need Senate confirmation. And you only have from early November to January 20th. And the president cannot wait a week, a month, or a year. They can't wait a minute. They need to hit the ground running the minute they're inaugurated in a world today that is the threat of terrorism, nuclear war, and all these other problems that we face. So Donald Trump has put our national security at risk once again, has limited our ability in so many ways, our country's ability. So now, by law, all the way back to this 1963, it guarantees help with transition and transfer of power and cooperation. In 2010, they added to that law, Obama pushed something to provide $7 million for the incoming administration. They need office space, computers, phones, secretaries, paper. I mean, they need everything to begin to screen and hire that many people. So that fund was available. Obama made those funds available to Trump. Trump did not make them available to Biden. We'll see what the GSA, the General Services Administration, or Government Services Administration, does with that. So the bad news is Trump has not cooperated, and he's told his whole team, all the Trump appointees are not cooperating. It's alarming, it's shocking, it's unnerving. But the good news is that career civil servants are cooperating. So the career staffers in the Department of Treasury and Department of Justice and at embassies, they appoint, as I wrote on the bottom of the screen, agency transition liaisons. So all the Biden people have someone at Treasury, FBI, EPA. I mean, every agency is there to assist with the transition. We just need the senior people who are briefed at that level. So Trump's final days, he's president for several more weeks. What might be done? So I have a concern. I know lots of reporters. I used to do media for about, 20 some years, a couple times a week. I quit recently, but I still every once in a while talk to reporters and know a few White House correspondents. And what they say is that what's leaked out of the White House, and by the way, this White House has leaked more than any other White House. It rivals the Titanic and it's leaking. Trump asked his team to put together a list, and they came up with 145 executive orders. That does not need congressional support. It does not need constitutional approval. The president can just, with the stroke of the pen. Trump has had his team identify 145 executive orders that will, quite frankly, dismantle the United States government, and he's starting to push those now. Weaken civil service protections for government employees, weaken whistleblowers, auditors, inspectors general, and others. He wants to fast track the release of certain pesticides, rodenticides, fungicides, herbicides, and chemicals, even though they're still in trial and it's believed they might be carcinogenous and cause cancer. He's trying to fast track them to be in our food supply and system. He's trying to fast track oil drilling permits in ANWR and the Arctic Reserve. Even though Biden, with the stroke of the pen, could revoke them, they'd be building and the oil would be there. Likewise, Trump's trying to fast track the construction of highways and other infrastructure through these sensitive Arctic areas, and just a number of other things. So the other thing I think Trump will probably do in his final days is he'll further punish China. Remember, he was coddling China and speaking very highly of the Chinese administration, and until once the pandemic moved along quite a bit, then we had a trade war with China, and he's been very critical of them. I think Trump will further punish China. He's already looking at a number of things to do that. So we could have another trade war, the sequel. Revenge on blue states and the deep state. He's already done revenge on blue states. With his release of emergency and disaster funding, he's given less to blue states than the red states, which is just unconscionable that partisan politics would factor into national emergencies and tragedies, but it has. The deep state. Again, Trump is as you know, believes in a lot of these QAnon type of conspiracies and deep state conspiracy theories. He retweets them, he talks about them. He's hired people that believe in him. He's given senior positions to people that believe in him. So by going after whistleblowers, auditors, inspectors general, by weakening civil service protections, it's a way of attacking this so-called deep state. Mass firings, he's already fired Mike Esper, the Secretary of Defense, Gina Haspel, the CIA director, Christopher Wray, the FBI director. Their days are numbered. He's gutting and cleaning out the senior intelligence officers, which really could put us at risk from a security perspective. He's eliminated more auditors and inspectors general, his elections officials. He's been telling crowds he wants to fire Fauci soon. So look for massive more firings as he's going out. Pardons. I think we're going to have pardon-a-palooza, and we already started it today, and there'll be more. So Trump has a lot of senior advisors and campaign managers: Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, George Papadopoulos, Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, and many more that have been indicted. Look for massive pardons for all of them. He's been talking about Martha Stewart, Edward Snowden, which is bizarre, as you've read, and today you've all been reading about it. Brad Parscale, who was one of his campaign managers. He was the guy running around half naked in Florida, threatening to shoot people, and got arrested. Real stable guy there. He's accused of stealing $10 million from the Trump campaign, at least 10 million, I should say. The numbers vary in the tens, as well as 10 million plus from the Republican National Committee. Trump will pardon Rudy and his family, as you've seen and read today, and pardon himself. So when Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, which, by the way, I felt was the right thing to do, it was kind of a carte blanche pardon because the Watergate charges were still forthcoming. So it was kind of a generic get out of jail free card. So with that precedent, Trump could give Don Jr. and Ivanka and Jared and Rudy and himself a freebie, but that would only be for federal crimes. That wouldn't work at state, and a lot of the charges being brought up in Manhattan and the courts there. Now, pardoning himself, most legal scholars say no, that doesn't fly. It's never happened before. We've never been there. I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent 30 years reading my buddies George Washington, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, the founders, the framers. I've also spent my career reading the Constitution. So I feel that I can weigh in on par with legal scholars and say, hell no. There's nothing in the notes of the framers, the Federalist Papers, the debates during the hot, humid summer of 1787 that would give any inkling that it would be okay to pardon yourself. Indeed, it's the opposite. They worried about a corrupt dictator abusing the rule of law. That was one of the most heated topics and frequent topics of the Constitutional Convention. So it's the opposite. ICE deportations, I think that's another thing to look at. Several reporters have said Trump's inner team is saying how frustrated they are that he never built his big, beautiful wall and he wasn't able to deport more DACA Dreamer kids and others. So he could go out with ordering massive ICE aggressive deportations. That's what some people are predicting. Well, the one I'm most worried about, I'm worried about everything, but the one I'm most worried about is the destruction of records. By law, every tweet today, every phone call, every memo, every interview, every gift the president gets, everything belongs to the people. When a president leaves office, it all goes to the National Archives and Records Administration, who controls it for 14 years, according to the 1978 Presidential Records Act. And then they release it through the National Archives and presidential libraries. So we've been blessed that ever since Hoover, and all the way up to those that have had presidential libraries in modern times, FDR, Truman, and on, they have preserved everything and released everything. There's only one example that was disturbing. Dick Cheney destroyed a lot of documents, which was against the law, but the Democrats are spineless and pathetic, so they can't, they should have prosecuted his ass, but they didn't. So I worry that Trump will do that. One, a lot of those papers could be incriminating for all the lawsuits he's facing and will continue to face. Two, his family, Jared and Ivanka, after complaining about Hillary's phone and her computer and her private email, they used private everything and texting and unsecured, at least Hillary's went through the State Department. But so he could destroy records to protect those around him. Also to prevent embarrassment. There have been countless books that have come out about Trump, written by quality journalists, written by lots of people that knew him, written by former employees. So it's not just liberal hack jobs. And they all depict somebody who's not in touch with reality, who's stone dumb, who didn't know Finland was a country, that Puerto Rico was an island, who thought that Andrew Jackson fought in a civil war and opposed it. He was dead before it. Who thought that Frederick Douglass is still alive, and just insane comments. So as all these records come out, you could have Trump saying juvenile things and reckless and dangerous things. In fact, according to all the books, it's going to be chock full of idiocy. So he could destroy the records to protect his reputation as these damning documents come out. He could negotiate a COVID relief package. Maybe he'll rise up and say, hey, the Democrats had COVID relief for small businesses. Schools are spending countless amounts of money to try to comply with everything, and a lot of them can't afford it. Maybe all the red Republican states and the president who told schools to reopen and gave them not a red cent to prepare for reopening, maybe he'll do that. Maybe he'll get back to providing support for small businesses. Mitch McConnell's had multiple bills sitting on his desk since spring. Maybe he'll do that. And try to go out with a positive for the history books. Maybe he'll do it just to deny Biden from getting to do it when he comes into office and getting credit for it. Maybe he'll go to Mar-a-Lago and just not leave. I don't know, extended vacation. He's been golfing almost every day since then. He'll do a farewell rally tour to all the red cities and states, and it'll be sort of the best hits, Lock Her Up, Fraud, I'm a Stable Genius. He'll do a rally around the country and bring out massive crowds. And I think all that will be designed for him to monetize the office. Trump's going to announce some kind of media enterprise. He's mad at Fox. So an OAN Fox, I don't know, Newsmax version of Trump Twitter or something. He had 70 plus million people that voted for him, and tens of millions of Americans didn't just vote for him. They love him. Millions believe he's the Messiah. He's far more popular among the Republican base than Ronald Reagan. Polls among Republicans consider Trump to be a better president than Lincoln. So Trump is revered by Republicans. So I think he'll monetize it because he monetizes everything. And he owes hundreds of millions of dollars to nefarious sources. So he needs to make some money. Jail. Yeah. So that's something to take a look at as we move forward. Biden's begun to appoint his team. So I made a couple comments for you at the top. There's some clear takeaways based on what he's appointed. He put a healthcare advisory team together. You know, Trump had a Fox News talker, discredited radiologist in charge of, you know, infectious diseases. No experience in it. Biden's health advisory team gives us some indicator. He's picked several of the nation's leading and most respected infectious disease experts, people with skill in that area. As he's announcing some of his appointments and who's on his short list, which aren't so short, by the way, has a couple of things to pop out. One, diversity. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush had some diversity in their cabinets. Obama's was remarkable. Trump did not really. It was a major step backward. But so far, diversity is clearly something. Biden has several historic firsts already. Janet Yellen, first female head of the Treasury. Avril Haines, first woman head of national intelligence. Alejandro Mayorkas at the Homeland Security, as you see, first Cuban American. Linda Thomas Greenfield at the UN, she's African American. So really a lot of historic firsts, a lot of diversity. Secondly, another takeaway from Obama's appointments, a lot of people that worked for Obama, Biden's appointments, a lot of people that worked for Obama. So he's using these senior people in Obama. Third, experience. You know, Trump was known for picking relatives, big campaign donors, criminals, gadflies with zero experience in some of the agencies they were running. Hell, Rick Perry didn't know what his agency was running, even did, energy. It's clear that Biden, more than big names, he's taken people with more experience over big names, which is a good sign that he's serious about governing. He's mentioning a lot of Republicans. Obama and Bill Clinton each had offered, Obama offered 3, I think each had 2 Republicans in their administration. W had 1 Dem. So he wants to reach across the aisle. He's picking centrists rather than progressives. There you go. There's a list, and at the bottom of the screen, there's some big names out there in the Democratic Party that will get something. So stay tuned. Election reforms. One thing that's become clear is the whole country wants election reforms. I think if the Democrats lost seats in the U.S. House, although they still control it. If the Democrats had picked up seats in the House, if the Democrats had picked up several seats in the Senate, you would have seen massive election reform, which we all want and we all agree. If the Senate's 50-50, or hell, even if the Democrats have it 51-49, McConnell will block everything because he's blocked everything for years. But everybody believes we need same-day voter registration. We need better designed ballots. We need better voting technology. We need nonpartisan supervisors of elections. We should make Election Day a holiday, maybe move it to Veterans Day to honor those who served and shame people into voting. We need to harden our elections architecture. Everybody knows Russia attempted to hack us in 2016. There's some indication that Russia, maybe China, maybe Iran tried this time. Hopefully we'll find out soon. So Trump refused to go along with this. He was the only person in the world saying Russia didn't hack us. Well, he and Putin. Everybody else, including the Republican Senate, said they did. We really did not. We spent 4 years without really hardening our elections systems against this. This is an attack against our democracy, everybody. We need to do this. We need massive reforms. I also think we need a conversation about the role of social media in our elections. Hear me out. I'm not calling for censorship. I'm a First Amendment freedom of speech person. But when foreign countries and hackers use our social media for misinformation, disinformation, lies, when prominent American politicians lie all day long on social media over a dozen times a day, day after day after day after day after day, when people are putting doubts about our democracy on social media, I'm not saying censor, I'm saying maybe a warning, maybe fact checking. There's something needs to be done. At least we have to have a conversation on it. And I think everybody would agree we need a national conversation on how we can improve our civic education. You know, I'm around 18 to 21-year-olds every day for the last 30 years as a professor, and then 10 years before that during my bachelor's, master's, and PhD. I know that every year it gets worse and worse and worse. And many of our students around the country can't begin to name basics about civic education. Hell, you heard voters. It's all become like a Jay Leno jaywalking comedy skit. It's a tragedy, everybody. The Electoral College, that's not going to happen. McConnell won't budge. If the Democrats had picked up a lot of seats, everybody's talking about it's time to get rid of the dang Electoral College. It's antiquated. It hasn't worked several times, 1800, 1824, 1876, 1888. And then in 2000 and 2016, the person with more votes lost. So it's time to get rid of the damn thing. And we need a constitutional amendment because it's mentioned in Article 2, Section 1, which is about the presidency. There's several proposals out there, and I listed them on the screen here, but nothing's going to happen. McConnell won re-election, and he'll have the Senate probably, or it'll be 50-50. One thing other folks are talking about is Washington, D.C. becoming the 51st state. Washington, D.C. has a population of 700,000 people, which is larger than or equivalent to 4 states, Alaska, North Dakota, Vermont, and Wyoming. In 2020, it's unconscionable that 750,000 Americans don't have basic voting rights and representation. So that makes no sense. So there's been a lot of talk about it. Biden has been somewhat receptive. Obama said he would support it. So there could be some movement on this front, although McConnell will kill it in the Senate. The talk of Washington, D.C. being the 51st state, some of the names proposed are New Columbia, Potomac for obvious reasons, and also Douglas, which it would be named for their former famous resident, Frederick Douglass, the great former slave orator. Of course, D.C.'s motto is taxation without representation, which is true. You can see on the screen there that there have been pushes for D.C. statehood ever since 1888, everybody. And since the 1990s, every year there's a measure introduced, but yet it goes nowhere. One of the problems is D.C. does not have local representation. Washington, D.C., the federal district, is administered by Congress. Even their budget is given to them by Congress. This dates to the year, to June of 1783, when they were debating, when the founders were debating where we should have a capital. Should we have a capital? Should we have more than one? What will it look like? One of the concerns was in June of 1783, and the Revolutionary War ended that September. So right at the end, a group of unpaid veterans and soldiers were angry. So they marched from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia, and they surrounded the building, which is now Independence Hall, trapping some members of Congress in the Pennsylvania Assembly inside. They were going to take them hostage. So Congress then realized if our capital is in a county or a city or another state, that state could theoretically control us. So that's when they came up with the idea of this autonomous jurisdiction, that the federal district would not be beholden to anyone, and it would administer itself. That's why Washington, D.C., the city, does not have control of its budget or its own decisions. The Congress runs it for them. The 23rd Amendment in 1961 gave D.C. 3 votes in the Electoral College. It says that D.C. could never have more votes than the smallest state, which is Wyoming at just under 500,000 people. In 2016, there was a referendum for D.C. statehood. Over 85% of the residents there supported it, so there's a lot of support. Puerto Rico could be the 52nd state. Over 61% of Puerto Ricans favored it as well, and the remainder split between staying in this Commonwealth status versus just complete independence from the United States. To admit a new state, there's a process. I put the measure in Article 4 of the Constitution. Article 1 is about the Congress, Article 2 about the president, 3 about the judiciary, 4 talks about how to add new states. So what it says is you cannot add a new state in another state's territory or take territory from an existing state or states, unless if they agree. So back in 1821, Massachusetts allowed Maine to go free and become its own state. That's what they had to agree. West Virginia wanted to break off from Virginia during the Civil War because people in the western part supported the Union, whereas Virginia was pro-Confederacy. But Virginia had already seceded from the Union, so they didn't get to agree, and West Virginia became a state. So here, how does the process work? The Congress invites a territory, or DC, to put together a constitution and have a vote, and they've done that. Then the Congress debates it, votes on it, then the president signs it, and voila, you have a new state. DC completed the process multiple times, and again recently in 2018. There's concern, though, as I said, DC, and by the way, here's a map of what it would look like, DC. So the concern is this: the whole district is now the federal district. So if it's going to become a state, one question is, part of the land that Maryland had given and Virginia was ceded. So part of it was given back. Would they take that land back? The other hand is all of DC is now the federal district. What they'd have to do is redraw the border, the boundary. They'd have to shrink DC, the district, to just the National Mall, you know, from the Library of Congress to the Capitol building, along the mall, the Smithsonian's, all the way down to the Lincoln Memorial, and then off to the one side to the Jefferson, the other side to the White House. So that little mall, that would be DC. All the rest would be the 51st state. So that's what happened when Alaska and Hawaii came in that order in 1959. Of course, DC would get 2 senators, and we'd now have 51 stars on the flag and 102 senators. The House is at 435, and that was fixed in 1929. What used to happen is as new states came in, you just kept adding more members of the House. But by the 1920s, they had 435 members. They were concerned, my goodness, we could end up with 4,035 members. So they fixed it at 435. Now, each member of Congress just represents more and more and more people, about 800,000-ish today. So what they'd have to do is either keep it at 435 and one state would have to give up a rep. And boy, that would be a dogfight. Or they'd have to pass a law increasing the size of the House from 435 to 436. They did that in 1959 to give Alaska 1 and Hawaii 2 reps, but that was temporary. In 1960, after the census, they took some away and then brought it back to 435. So another question everybody's talking about is, will the Democrats pack the Supreme Court? Republicans have said it's unconstitutional. The fact check is no, it is constitutional. Article 3 of the Constitution doesn't mention packing or unpacking. That's when you add or take away members of the court. It also doesn't even mention how many members are on the Supreme Court. So the fact check is, in fact, it is constitutional to do it. Number 2, the Republicans are saying it's illegal. No, there's a law. You can do it. Number 3, they're saying it's unprecedented. No, fact check is it is precedented. In fact, over the last 20 years, 10 states have tried to pack, increase, or unpack, decrease the number of their members of their state Supreme Courts. And all 10 were Republicans that did it, by the way. The Republicans, through Merrick Garland and the district and appellate courts, have been packing the Supreme Court. So they're the ones that have been doing it, not the Democrats. And it's hypocrisy once again. Where do we get 9 members of the Supreme Court? Here's where. The 1789 Judiciary Act. The framers were fighting so much during the Constitutional Convention that they realized they couldn't put together the courts, or people might not sign the Constitution. So what they decided to do was just let the Constitution as it is, and they said, we'll fix it by law. They also knew that the man on the left, John Jay, would be the first Chief Justice, and he was great, and his every action and inaction would forge the courts, and it did. Then you have the 1789 Judiciary Act, and that set the number of Supreme Court justices at 6. So that's the original amount. Amy Coney Barrett always talks about originalism, originalism, originalism. The original number is 6. So if we go back to 6 and unpack it from 9, we'd have to get rid of the 3 Trump appointees, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, which is what Barrett's written about and talks about, although now I think she's changed her mind. But at any rate, So here's what happened. We had 6. Then in 1801, John Adams unpacked it down to 5. In 1802, Jefferson packed it to 6. In 1807, Jefferson packed it to 7. In 1837, Andrew Jackson packed it to 9. In 1863, Honest Abe packed it to 10. After the Civil War in 1866, Andrew Jackson, our 17th president, unpacked it down to 7. And then in 1869, Ulysses Grant packed it to 9, and it's been 9 ever since. Why 9? It's because we should have 1 Supreme Court justice for every appellate court. There were 9, now there's 13. So technically Biden should add 4, I guess you could say. So it is constitutional, it is legal, and it is precedented. You'd only need a law to do this. Yeah, so I talked about that. So legal scholars have had many proposals here. A group of Ivy League law professors and former federal judges have said that Mitch McConnell and Trump have politicized the Supreme Court to the point where it's undermined the court's autonomy and credibility. I agree, but I would also say that all previous presidents over about the last 40 years or so have politicized the court as well. We see nominees who only answer 50 to 70% of the questions. Barrett only answered 20% of the questions. Shame on her. So the proposal, one proposal from these Ivy League law profs and former judges is we should increase the Supreme Court to 15 in order to save it. 5 members appointed by the Dems, 5 by the Republicans. The other 5 would be appointed by the 10. And the other 5 would serve 1-year rotating terms, and they'd be picked from the appellate courts. I like that. Another proposal is we keep it at 9 justices, but the 9 would serve 1-year rotating terms from the appellate courts. Another proposal is term limits. They're talking about 18 years. I've always favored 10 years for what that's worth. Why? Here's why. Even though I'm someone that generally opposes term limits for presidents and for Congress, I've always favored them for the Supreme Court, because at least in the House, you have 435 people. And the president, at least we vote on him. The Supreme Court's not voted on. And you have only 9 people who could serve for decades deciding what our Constitution says. That's not democracy. From 1980 until today, the average tenure of a Supreme Court justice is 29 years, everybody. We've had multiple serving 30, 35, 36 years. That's not democracy. So I favor 10-year term limits. I think it's, plus, this comes from British common law. It was known as the Good Behavior Clause. And the argument was hundreds of years ago that if judges are behaving, let them serve for life. And it'll be a good check against the parliament or the king. It'll also be a way that the courts can be free from partisan politics. Well, the framers like that, so they added it to the Constitution. They even spelled good behavior, behavior with the U, the British way. Now we don't have kings anymore. We have laws to prevent the courts from being politicized. And remember, when this was developed in English common law centuries ago, people only lived to be 30 or 40. Today, they live to be much longer. So let me bring this toward a close. What Biden's indicating is he's going to use a stroke of the pen to undo many of Trump's executive orders and international agreements. An EO, an executive order, is domestic. Now, it can't deal with the Constitution and it can't deal with the law. What it is the Constitution says the president is the CEO, basically. He's commander-in-chief and head of the government. So anything dealing with the military and the implementation of laws and how the government works, the president can sign with the stroke of the pen. So Trump's international agreements, which that's the same internationally, his international agreements have been, I've got to say it, everybody, shocking, jaw-dropping, alarming, frightening. He's withdrawn from virtually every treaty, international alliance and everything. It's just gutted. The post-war order built by Harry Truman that kept the peace, and every president from Ike on, both political parties, Eisenhower all the way through, every president of both parties followed this to the letter of the law, except Trump, who said it was a joke. The Truman Doctrine and this post-war order, they're laughing at us, and he dismantled it. If it was good enough for every single president, I think it should have been good enough for Trump. Every Congress stood with it, except McConnell's Republicans in the Senate. So the TPP, that's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We all agree China is one of the greatest threats. This was designed to bring about a dozen countries in Asia, none of whom are large enough to stand up to China, to bring them together in a group, and they stand with us. That way it could be a bulwark, a buttress against Chinese military, political, and economic expansionism. Everybody in the world liked this, but the Chinese leaders were angry. So Trump sided with the Chinese leaders over US national security and global security and withdrew from it. The Iran nuclear deal. Trump withdrew from that with no replacement. Now Iran is saying they're pursuing enrichment of uranium. The Paris Climate Accord, Trump withdrew from that. Now the U.S. is aligned with Syria and I think Syria and Iran. I think even North Korea signed it. At any rate, there was an agreement, a multilateral agreement to deal with North Korea, China, and several other nations. We all aligned together, even China, North Korea's benefactor, to keep an eye on Kim Jong-un and his nuclear stockpile. The only one in the world that didn't like it was Kim Jong-un. So Trump gave him a birthday present and went against U.S. national security in the world and withdrew from that. The INF agreement, that's the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Agreement, to keep an eye on Vladimir Putin's nuclear stockpile. The whole world favors this because of nuclear war, but Putin didn't want it. So Trump gave Putin. Trump sided with the Chinese dictator, the North Korean dictator, and the Russian dictator over the world and U.S. national security. And to my Republican friends, there's no other explanation. And I apologize, I'm being factual. There is no other explanation. He sided with Putin and withdrew from the INF. He also sided with Putin and withdrew from the Open Skies Agreement in Europe, which has been around for decades to keep an eye on military expansionism. He ended normalization with Cuba. The list goes on. The U.S. refused to participate in the World Health Organization in the middle of an international pandemic. The State Department obviously used to monitor international arms trafficking. Trump, by an order, disallowed the State Department from monitoring international arms trafficking. We don't monitor international arms trafficking under Trump. I can't make this shit up. Why? Because 3 of the countries that are behind international arms trafficking are Trump's 3 best friends, Russia, North Korea, and China. They don't like it, so we gave them a present. We don't monitor international arms trafficking. We withdrew from the UN Human Rights Commission. We withdrew from UNESCO, the UN's educational, scientific, and cultural organization, whose main job is to list World Heritage Sites and protect them, like the Galapagos, like Machu Picchu, like the Great Barrier Reef. We withdrew on the UN Compact on Migration. Trump never fully staffed any of our embassies or diplomatic missions. They were mostly unstaffed. I made a list here. I'll let you read them. I'm losing my voice. I put some highlights in red for you. Trump passed scores of executive orders that really gut the U.S. American institutions and democracy. The oversights on the financial industry. It's now virtually impossible for farmers to sue big ag companies. The government doesn't even track disparity and pay by sex and race, which is something the government's done since the 60s. He ended the ban on oil drilling in the Arctic. He ended limits on methane leaks and dangerous emissions from drilling and everything. There's a rule there used to be a rule for years, since the 70s, requiring chemical factories to inform the public about health and safety risks and what they were emitting and monitoring. He ended that as well. There was a pesticide, chloropyrifos, one of several that is believed to be carcinogenous, a cancer causing. It's undergoing trials now, but some big ag companies wanted to use it for pesticide spraying. So Trump is fast tracking it and allowing it to be sprayed on our crops, even if it causes cancer. He's weakened the Endangered Species Act. You can now hunt bears and wolves in federal wildlife refuges. I thought a wildlife refuge was a wildlife refuge. The EPA, they have no longer have any teeth. Companies are allowed to dump mining waste into streams and creeks and so on. He ended the health standards for school lunch programs. Poor children in inner cities and rural Appalachia and elsewhere You know, at least they got an apple and a juice carton or a milk carton for lunch. He's ended those standards. There were restrictions that if you're mentally ill, you can't own a gun. Trump gave the NRA that. Lobbyists, I mean, he has undermined almost every protection and regulation on lobbying, as you could see here as well. Hazardous materials and poisons. There were ways to transport it at night through the least populated area. And so now you don't have to. You can dispose of toxic coal ash pretty much wherever you want. He lowered auto emission standards. The list goes on. He gutted the Clean Air Act, gutted the Clean Water Act from an enforcement perspective, reduced the number of wildlife refuges and forests. And a year and a half before the global pandemic, he eliminated the federal government's pandemic emergency panel. So in closing, George Washington's vision was for healing and the renewal of this nation. Lincoln did that during the Civil War with his great Gettysburg Address, a new birth of freedom and reconstruction, forgiving the South and magnanimity, rebuilding them. Harry Truman did this after World War II and promoting predecessors to civil rights and healthcare and all that. So we need that kind of vision, I think, for renewal and healing. Will we get back to normal politically? I think the genie's out of the bottle and there's no putting it back in. I believe that this doesn't end well. I think too much damage has been done. A good percentage of Americans don't believe in COVID. They don't believe in vaccinations. They won't get vaccinated. They don't believe in climate change. They don't believe in evolution. They don't believe in basic science. A good percentage of the Americans thought it was just fine when our president made fun of John McCain and POWs, Gold Star families, the disabled, and list goes on and on and on. We really need, I think it's a fight for the soul of America. Our institutions have been weakened. The rule of law has been weakened. The Constitution has been delivered several body shots. And I think the most important thing to restore our democracy is we need to restore a sense of civility. We've lost our sense of civility, decency, and just basic kindness and decorum. Been replaced by lying, bullying, and so on. So I think we have a long row to hoe here on the farm. And to my Republican friends, I apologize. I love my Constitution and my country and the rule of law. And I assure you, this is not an opinion. It's a PhD. And I feel I must talk about all these issues. And I assure you, you know me, I fact check, I double, I triple, I quadruple everything. So with that rather depressing talk, let me say two things. Let me say to my friends that I will come back in the future and we'll do a hilarious history talk. We can all have a drink. And secondly, I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
So first of all, thank you as always. That was extremely enlightening. We're very thankful to have you as part of the Heron Bay family. And of course, you'll be back. We'll ask the homeowners if they want to type in any questions, but I'm going to use the prerogative, since I have the mic, of asking you too. If you can look into your crystal ball, who are the candidates going to be in 2024?
Well, Nikki Haley and Marco Rubio have all but already moved to Iowa and New Hampshire. So Nikki Haley and Marco Rubio are starting the posturing already, and they would be front runners. Rubio, after criticizing Trump, tied himself to the worst measures of Trump. So that'll be difficult for him to buckle himself from that. But Rubio's a good fundraiser, and he looks like Ricky Martin, so that helps in American politics. Nikki Haley is a rising star in the Republican Party. And Nikki Haley has almost, they used to say Reagan was Teflon. Nikki Haley has some of that as well. She gets great press. So I think they would be formidable. I think, as we saw in 2016 among the Republicans and 2020 among the Democrats, the most crowded fields in American history. What was 17 Republicans running in 2016, over 20 Dems in 2020? I think 2024 will be another very, very crowded race on the potentially on both sides, as Biden has made some indication that he would only serve a single term because of his age.
Okay, my second question, if Georgia splits and the Senate becomes 50-50, Does Joe Manchin become the most powerful person in the Senate?
Joe Manchin from West Virginia becomes the most powerful person on the planet if it's 50-50. Joe Manchin is a conservative Democrat who votes half the time with the Dems and half the time with the Republicans. West Virginia went overwhelmingly Republican, so he's mindful of that. So that's that gravity that pulls him to the right. So yes. So if it's 50-50, and there's chances it could be, the Democrats would have control of the Senate, because at 50-50, the tiebreaker is the vice president. And since they have the White House, they'd have the tiebreaker. But if it's 50-50, Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, the Democratic and Republican leaders, they still have to agree. And on every bill, the majority party sets the rules, the committee assignment, the time, the calendar date. If it's 50-50, Schumer and McConnell are going to have to work together on every bill to set the rules jointly. So could that force them to cooperate and compromise, which is what democracy is supposed to be about? Could it slow down the Senate where nothing gets done because they can't get together on anything? It'll be interesting to see. So, 2020 being the year it was, I think the only way it can end is we've got to have a 50-50 in the Senate to make it just the Rubik's Cube, and aliens have to invade the planet.
Okay, and let's see, there's a question. Jill Vogel asks, should we change the way we choose electors?
Yeah, no question. That I agree. Good question. So we've done this in the past, but only marginally to improve it. So all 50 states have their own way of picking electors. Some are at a statewide convention. Some are voted on. Some are leaders in the party. So it's a decentralized, fragmented mess. Each of the 50 states has their own way of doing it. No one knows how all 50 states do it. No one even knows who the state's electors are. So it's indefensible. Back in the 70s, George McGovern pushed some reforms. One reform did go through, and that was this. They used to pick the electors like 2 or so years before the election. That way, when someone like you, Neil, or someone like Minda or Luisana said, I'd like to be an elector, and you announce that 3 months before the election, they say, sorry, too late. They were picked behind cigar smoke-filled doors years ago. So out of the McGovern reforms, now they have to be picked during the year of the election. So that's one minor reform, but I agree completely with the question. We need to reform that. I once made a list of 100 reforms that I wanted to see in our election system. I did it for a project for the National Director of the League of Women Voters. I have to find that list somewhere, but this was one of them. And I was excited for a while, not just from a partisan perspective, but if the Democrats had picked up seats, there was legitimate talk that we would have comprehensive election reforms. But if it's 50-50 or close, Mitch McConnell, again, he'll kill everything, because he did under Obama. He even did under Trump, because some of it got Democratic support. He even brags about it. He proudly calls himself the Grim Reaper and all sorts of nicknames. He's got over 100 bills sitting on his desk since spring, bills for COVID relief. So, so I don't think there's much of a chance of election reform, although I think we desperately need it.
And I think that covers the questions. Once again, extraordinary. You will come back, I'm sure. In the meantime, a healthy, happy Thanksgiving, a safe trip to Pennsylvania. Stay in touch, and we'll look forward to you coming back. Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for participating.
Good to see the three of you. Good to talk to everybody. Take care. Happy holidays, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.